Somerset, England, spring 1826. The iron gates of Tremont Hall stood like dark sentinels against grey skies, elaborate scrollwork shadowed by years of grief that had settled over the estate like permanent fog. Lady Isabel Drayton stepped from her hired carriage after 4 days of bone-jarring travel, smoothed her travelling dress with trembling hands, and felt a cold knot tighten in her chest. Behind her, Mrs. Fletcher, the widow she had engaged as chaperone, made a worried sound. Lady Isabel, arriving unannounced, seems most irregular. Isabel lifted her chin with determination earned through 14 years of waiting. I made a promise when I was 10 years old, Mrs. Fletcher. I intend to keep it. The massive doors opened, revealing a footman whose expression shifted from courtesy to shock. The lady's air of unflinching purpose, clearly having travelled 2 counties for a matter she would not abandon, was entirely unexpected. If stories of love born from childhood promises move your heart, subscribe now. You will not want to miss what happens next. Lady Isabel Drayton of Devon to see the Earl of Tremont, Isabel announced, her voice steady despite the chaos of emotion beneath her carefully maintained exterior. Please inform his lordship that I have come to discuss a matter of some 14 years standing. The footman blinked twice in uncertainty. He settled for a compromise, ushering them into the entrance hall with its soaring ceiling and portrait-lined walls, before disappearing with unseemly haste toward the interior of the house. Mrs. Fletcher positioned herself on a chair near the door, with the air of a woman preparing for rapid departure should circumstances require it. Isabel remained standing, her gaze traveling across the marble floors and draped mirrors. Everything about Tremont Hall whispered of abandonment, as though the house itself had stopped breathing years ago and never quite remembered how to begin again. Footsteps approached, measured and deliberate. Isabel turned just as a man entered the hall, and time performed that peculiar trick of collapsing 14 years into a single heartbeat. Jonathan Harlow, Earl of Tremont, had been handsome at 24 when she had encountered him in the gardens. At 38, sorrow had sculpted his features into something more severe, more striking. Threads of silver showed at his temples, lines bracketed a mouth that spoke of years spent not smiling. His grey eyes, which she remembered as warm with laughter, held the quality of winter stone. He stopped 3 paces from her, his expression revealing no recognition whatsoever, and spoke with the careful politeness of a man addressing an unexpected and potentially troublesome stranger. Lady Isabel Drayton, I confess myself at a loss. Have we been introduced previously? The words struck like physical blows, each one a small violence against the certainty that had sustained her through 18 refused proposals, through her parents' increasingly desperate pleas, through 4 days of bone-jarring travel. Of course he did not remember. Why would he? She had been a child, an amusing incident during a garden party, nothing more. Isabel drew breath, called upon every lesson in deportment her mother had drilled into her since birth, and delivered the words she had rehearsed 1,000 times in her mirror. My lord, we met in the spring of 1812. I was 10 years old and became lost in your gardens during a visit my parents made to Tremont Hall. You found me near the lilac arbor and were exceptionally kind to a frightened child. Something flickered in his eyes. Memory, perhaps, or merely the effort of trying to place a face from 14 years past. You told me, Isabel continued, her voice remaining remarkably steady considering the magnitude of what she was about to say, that when I grew up and was properly presented to society, I should return, and you would court me with all due formality and propriety. The silence that followed possessed weight and texture. Mrs. Fletcher made a small, choking sound. The footman, who had reappeared during Isabel's speech, stood frozen in an attitude of scandalized fascination. Jonathan Harlow stared at her with an expression that cycled through disbelief and dawning memory. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the brittle edge of a man confronting an impossibility he could not immediately dismiss. You cannot possibly be serious. I am entirely serious, my lord. Isabel met his gaze without flinching. I made you a promise that day. I told you that when I grew up I would be your wife. You laughed, but you agreed. I've spent 14 years honoring that promise. I refused 18 proposals from perfectly suitable gentlemen because I gave you my word first. The color drained from Jonathan's face, leaving him pale beneath his naturally dark complexion. His hands tightened until the knuckles showed white. "This is madness. You traveled here unaccompanied based on the whimsical conversation of a 10-year-old child. I am accompanied by Mrs. Fletcher, who is a widow of impeccable reputation," Isabel corrected with perfect courtesy. "And yes, I traveled here because I keep my promises, my lord, even those made in childhood, especially those." Jonathan turned away from her, attention suggesting impulses he could not voice in the presence of servants and strangers. He stood with his back to her for a long moment, his shoulders rigid beneath his perfectly tailored coat, and Isabel saw the very instant when duty and propriety won their battle against the desire to order her from his house. When he faced her again, his expression had settled into the careful neutrality of a man determined to handle an unexpected crisis with whatever grace remained available. "Lady Isabel, the conventions of hospitality require that I offer you accommodation. However, I must make it clear that whatever understanding you believe existed between us, it was the product of a child's imagination and an adult's indulgence. Nothing more." "Then it should be simple enough to prove me wrong, should it not?" Isabel replied, and felt a small surge of satisfaction when his eyes widened fractionally at her boldness. "Grant me 1 week, my lord. If at the end of that time you remain convinced that I am merely a deluded woman pursuing a fantasy, I will return to Devon and trouble you no further." Jonathan looked at Isabel with an expression that mingled exasperation and reluctant admiration. Finally, he inclined his head in a gesture that might have been agreement or merely exhausted surrender. "1 week," he said quietly. "Mrs. Hathaway, our housekeeper, will show you to the guest chambers. But, Lady Isabel, I will not be persuaded by appeals to sentiment or obligations that exist only in memory. I trust you understand that." "I understand perfectly, my lord." Isabel curtsied with flawless precision, her eyes never leaving his. "All I ask is the opportunity to remind you that some promises once made carry weight regardless of the years that pass." He turned and walked from the entrance hall with the careful, measured steps of a man retreating from a battlefield he had not known existed. Isabel watched him go, her heart now accompanied by a fierce determination. There would be no turning back now. Mrs. Hathaway appeared shortly thereafter. She led Isabel and Mrs. Fletcher up the grand staircase to the upper floor, past portraits of Harlow ancestors whose painted eyes seemed to follow their progress. "The blue chamber overlooks the gardens, my lady," Mrs. Hathaway said as she opened a door onto a room that was beautiful in the manner of things long neglected. "His lordship has ordered a light supper sent up, as you must be fatigued from your journey." "Thank you, Mrs. Hathaway." Isabel moved to the window, drawing back the heavy curtains. "The lilac arbor, where would I find it from here?" The housekeeper's expression shifted. "You know about the lilacs, my lady? I was here once, many years ago." Isabel traced a finger along the window frame. "The lilacs were in bloom then. Are they still there?" A long pause followed, during which Isabel could feel Mrs. Hathaway's scrutiny like a tangible weight. Finally, the housekeeper spoke, her voice carefully neutral. "Follow the gravel path east from the fountain. The arbor is there, though his lordship has not visited it in 9 years, not since Lady Amelia passed. The lilacs bloom each spring regardless, but no one tends them now." The words settled into the room with the weight of revelation. Isabel turned from the window, meeting Mrs. Hathaway's gaze directly. "Lady Amelia was his first wife." "His only wife, my lady. She died in 1817 along with their infant daughter, both taken by scarlet fever within 48 hours. Mrs. Hathaway's voice remained steady, but something in her eyes suggested depths of loyalty and sorrow. "His lordship has not been the same since. We who serve him have watched him become a shadow, living in this house as though it were a tomb rather than a home." The raw grief evident in Mrs. Hathaway's account made her childhood promise seem suddenly inadequate, even presumptuous. What right did she have to march into this man's carefully preserved grief and demand he honor words spoken in a moment of innocent whimsy? "I did not come here to cause pain," Isabel said softly. "I want you to know that, Mrs. Hathaway." The housekeeper regarded her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Forgive me for speaking plainly, my lady, but Tremont Hall has been dead for 9 years. Perhaps it takes someone foolish enough to believe in childhood promises to remind us that the living are meant to live. She left before Isabel could form a response. Mrs. Fletcher, who had remained diplomatically silent, placed a gentle hand on her arm. "My dear girl," the widow said quietly, "are you certain you wish to continue with this course? The Earl appears to be a man deeply wounded. You may find that some griefs run too deep for even the most sincere intentions to heal." Isabel looked out at the gardens. "I came here knowing he might send me away, Mrs. Fletcher. What I did not anticipate was discovering that he has already sent himself away, locked himself into grief so profound that he cannot see past it. But that does not change my obligation. I made him a promise. Whether he remembers making one in return is almost beside the point now." They took their supper in the blue chamber. Isabel lay awake long after her companion had fallen asleep. Through her window she could see the gardens silvered by moonlight. Somewhere in that landscape the lilacs that had witnessed her first promise still stood, waiting for someone to remember they existed. The following morning arrived with the pale, watery sunshine characteristic of English springs. Isabel dressed with particular care in a walking dress of jonquil muslin. Mrs. Hathaway appeared shortly after breakfast to inform her that the Earl would receive her in the library at 11 o'clock. Isabel spent the intervening hours exploring the public rooms. The house existed in a state of immaculate preservation, maintained to perfection yet somehow utterly lifeless, like a dusty museum. At precisely 11 o'clock, Isabel presented herself at the library door. A footman opened it to reveal a room that was, unlike the rest of the house, unmistakably inhabited. Books lay open on tables. Papers covered the massive desk. A fire burned in the hearth despite the mild weather. Jonathan Harlow stood near the window, staring out at his domain with the expression of a man who saw nothing of what lay before him. He turned as she entered, and Isabel noted the shadows beneath his eyes, the tension in his jaw. If she had kept him awake, at least she had managed to penetrate his careful armor of indifference. "Lady Isabel." He gestured toward a chair near the fire, taking one opposite. "I trust you slept well?" "Well enough, thank you." Isabel settled her skirts. "Your home is very beautiful, Lord Tremont, though I confess I sense it might benefit from more regular occupation." A muscle tightened in his jaw, the only indication that her observation had struck home. "Tremont Hall serves its purpose adequately. Now, to the matter at hand. I have been considering your extraordinary claim regarding a promise made 14 years ago." "Not a claim, my lord, a fact. A fact that exists only in your memory and mine. Tell me, Lady Isabel, what precisely did you envision would happen when you arrived at my door yesterday? That I would fall to my knees in gratitude that you had remembered a moment's whimsy?" The words were designed to wound. "I envisioned precisely what has happened, my lord," she replied calmly. "That you would be shocked, confused, and quite possibly appalled. I did not expect gratitude. I expected exactly what I received: resistance, skepticism, and a profound desire for me to vanish back to Devon and leave you in peace." Jonathan's eyebrows rose fractionally. "And yet you remain." "And yet I remain." Isabel met his gaze steadily. "I am here because when I was 10 years old, I made a promise to a kind man who rescued a frightened child from her own foolishness. That man agreed, in jest perhaps, but agreed nonetheless, that he would court me when I came of age. I have come of age. I am here to collect on that agreement. By showing up uninvited and demanding I marry you." His voice carried an edge of something sharp. "That is a rather unique interpretation of courtship, Lady Isabel." "I am not demanding you marry me," Isabel corrected, leaning forward slightly. "I am asking that you honor the spirit of what was promised, that you spend time with me, that you come to know me as I am now, and that you make your decision based on that knowledge rather than on your determination to remain locked in the past." The words hung between them, more challenging than a lady should be to an earl. Isabel watched Jonathan's face, surprise, irritation, and something that looked almost like curiosity. "You speak very freely for an unmarried woman addressing a man she scarcely knows," he observed. "I am 24 years old, my lord, firmly past the first flush of youth. I have refused 18 proposals from men ranging from baronets to the younger son of a marquess. My parents despair of me. The only freedom remaining to me is the freedom of honesty." She smiled, not entirely without bitterness. When one has already sacrificed every conventional path to happiness, one loses the compulsion to observe the conventions that govern such sacrifices. Jonathan stood abruptly, pivoting to the window, one hand gripping the frame. Isabel thought she could see the tension radiating through his shoulders like a physical force. "You should not have come here," he said quietly. "Whatever promise you believe was made, it belongs to a different time, a different man." "I am not the person you met 14 years ago, Lady Isabel. That man died 9 years ago along with everything he valued." Isabel rose, taking several steps toward him. "Then perhaps," she said softly, "it is time someone reminded you how to live again." He turned sharply. "You presume too much." "I presume exactly enough." Isabel lifted her chin, refusing to be cowed by the anger in his eyes. "Mrs. Hathaway told me about Lady Amelia. I am deeply sorry for your loss, but they have been gone 9 years, and you have turned this beautiful house into a shrine where you worship grief rather than memory. That is not honor. That is a different kind of death." Jonathan stared at her. Isabel held his gaze, her resolve unshaken. Finally he spoke, his voice dangerously quiet. "You know nothing of loss, Lady Isabel. You are a child playing at romance based on a fantasy." "I know this," Isabel replied steadily. "I know that Lady Amelia would not wish to see you living as a ghost in the house you shared. And I know that somewhere beneath the grief, the man who was kind to a lost child still exists, because that is the man I came here to find." Jonathan moved quickly, closing the distance between them. "And if I tell you that man is gone forever, what then, Lady Isabel? Will you accept reality and return to your comfortable life in Devon?" Isabel looked up at him, seeing the pain and desperate loneliness written in his face. "I will stay," she said quietly, "because I made a promise, and because I think you need someone to remind you that you are still alive, whether you wish to be or not." He stepped back, his expression closing once more into careful neutrality. "As you wish," he said formally. "You may remain at Tremont Hall for the week you requested, but do not mistake my hospitality for encouragement, Lady Isabel. I am not the man you seek, and this house is not the fairy tale you imagine it to be." He left the library without another word. Isabel remained where she stood, her hands trembling now that the confrontation had ended. Mrs. Fletcher appeared. "I heard voices raised. Are you quite well, my dear?" "I am well," Isabel replied. "Or at least I'm not worse than I expected to be." She moved to the window, looking out at the gardens. She would stay her full week, as agreed. She would remind Jonathan Harlow what it meant to live. The rest of that first day passed in careful avoidance. Jonathan did not appear for luncheon or the afternoon. Isabel used the time to explore the grounds, always accompanied by Mrs. Fletcher. The lilac arbor stood exactly where memory had placed it. Purple and white blooms hung in heavy clusters, filling the air with a fragrance so intense it was almost overwhelming. Isabel sat on the stone bench, allowing herself a moment of pure feeling. She had come here, to this arbor with its intoxicating perfume and its weight of memory. "So this is where it happened," Isabel startled. Jonathan stood at the entrance to the arbor. "I did not mean to disturb you," she said. "This arbor has been neglected for years." Jonathan moved deeper into the shadowed space. "I had forgotten how beautiful it could be when the lilacs bloom." "It was beautiful then too," Isabel said softly. "I remember thinking it was the most magical place I had ever seen, and you appeared out of nowhere like a prince from a fairy story and rescued me from my own foolishness." Jonathan's mouth twitched, the gesture falling short of a smile. "I was hardly a prince, Lady Isabel. Merely a man who heard a child crying and investigated. You did more than simply point me toward the house. You made me feel as though I mattered, even though I was just a frightened child." He looked at her then. "You had lilac petals in your hair," he said slowly. "You told me your name was Isabel Margaret Louisa Drayton, and you recited it as though it were a title of great importance." "My mother taught me that a lady should always be able to state her full name clearly," Isabel replied. "And then you declared with absolute certainty that when you grew up, you would marry me." Jonathan shook his head slightly. "I thought it was charming, The way children can be charming when they speak without understanding the weight of words. I understood perfectly well, Isabel countered quietly. I meant every word I said. Jonathan sat on the bench. You were 10 years old, Lady Isabel. You could not possibly have understood what marriage meant, what love was, what you were promising. I did not understand marriage or love, but I understood something else, Isabel admitted. I understood that you were kind when you did not have to be, that if I ever met a man who made me feel the way you did in those few moments we spent together, I would want to spend my life with him. Jonathan looked up at her. And you found no such man in 14 years? I found 18 men who wished to marry me for various reasons, Isabel replied honestly. I did not find a single one who made me feel that particular certainty I felt at 10 years old. So I refused them all and came here instead, because I wanted to discover if the feeling I remembered was real, or merely a child's fantasy. And what have you discovered? The question was asked softly. Isabel looked at him. I have discovered that the man I remembered has been wounded by losses I cannot fully comprehend, and that the certainty I felt 14 years ago was not wrong, merely incomplete. You were kind to a child. I want to know if you can be kind to a woman. Jonathan stood abruptly. He remained, one hand braced against the trunk of an ancient lilac, his head bowed. Lady Amelia loved the lilacs, he said finally. She would come here every spring. When she died, I could not bear to come here. The lilacs reminded me of everything I had lost. And now? Isabel asked gently. Now they just remind me that life continues whether we wish it to or not. He turned to face her. You are relentless, Lady Isabel. I do not know whether to admire your determination or deplore your stubbornness. The two are not mutually exclusive, my lord, Isabel replied. I have been told by various disappointed suitors that my stubbornness is both my greatest flaw and my most intriguing quality. Jonathan's lips twitched. I begin to see why you refused 18 proposals. Few men would be equal to the challenge of managing you. I do not require managing, Lord Tremont. I require partnership. There is a considerable difference. He regarded her for a long moment. 1 week, Lady Isabel. You have 1 week to prove to me that this is not merely the fantasy of a woman who has romanticized a childhood encounter beyond all reason. But I warn you, I am not an easy man. I am not particularly kind anymore, and I am not certain I am capable of what you seem to think you want from me. All I want, Isabel said steadily, is the opportunity to discover who you are now. Give me that, and I promise you whatever I discover will be enough. Jonathan extended his hand and Isabel took it. They shook once formally, sealing their bargain. Come to the library at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, he said. If we are to spend a week becoming acquainted, we might as well begin properly. He left then. Isabel remained in the arbor among the blooming lilacs. She had gained time, opportunity, and his grudging willingness to allow her into his presence. She had 6 days remaining. The following morning, Isabel presented herself at the library at precisely 9 o'clock. Jonathan rose when she entered. Good morning, Lady Isabel. His tone was formal. I confess I spent much of last night attempting to determine how one properly courts a woman who has announced her intention to marry you. Perhaps, Isabel suggested, we might begin by abandoning the notion of courtship altogether and simply spend time becoming acquainted. The courtship, if it happens, can develop naturally from that foundation. Jonathan set aside his correspondence. Very well, Lady Isabel. Let us begin with honest conversation. Tell me what brought you to Devon originally. Your accent suggests you were not raised there. I was born in Surrey, Isabel replied. My father inherited the Devon property from a distant cousin when I was 16. He preferred the quiet of the country. And yet you refused 18 proposals in 8 years, Jonathan observed. Isabel met his gaze directly. I could not convince myself to accept a life of comfortable mediocrity when I had once believed I could have something extraordinary. I would have been miserable in a marriage based on pragmatism rather than genuine feeling. And you believe you could have genuine feeling for me? Jonathan's tone was skeptical. I believe, Isabel said carefully, that I felt something at 10 years old that suggested the capacity for such feeling. Whether that capacity could be realized with you specifically, I do not know. That is what I came here to discover. Jonathan leaned back in his chair. Mrs. Hathaway told you about Amelia, about my daughter. She mentioned them, yes, only to explain why Tremont Hall feels so empty. It does not concern me. Jonathan stood, moving to the window. If we are to engage in honest conversation, then you should know the full extent of what you are proposing to take on. I am a man who failed to protect them when they needed me most. How did you fail them? I was in London, Jonathan said. Parliament was in session. Amelia wanted me to stay. I dismissed her concerns as the natural anxieties of a new mother. I left her here alone. Within 3 days, both Amelia and the baby were dead. Of scarlet fever, Isabel said gently. Your presence would not have saved them, Lord Tremont. My presence would have meant they did not die alone, Jonathan replied, his voice rough. My presence would have meant something, even if it could not change the outcome. Isabel understood the true depth of his guilt. Punishing yourself for 9 years by refusing to live will not bring them back. It will only ensure that 3 lives were lost that terrible week instead of 2. Jonathan turned sharply, anger flashing in his eyes. You overstep, Lady Isabel. I will continue to overstep if that is what is required to make you understand that grief cannot be allowed to consume everything else. You are 8 and 30 years old. Will you spend all of them as a ghost, haunting the rooms where happier men once lived? What alternative do you suggest? I suggest you remember them with love rather than guilt, Isabel replied steadily. Honor their memory by living the life they would have wanted for you. And perhaps Lady Amelia would not wish to see you locked in this house, refusing all connection, all joy, all possibility of future happiness. The silence that followed was profound. You are the first person in 9 years who has dared speak to me thus. My friends tread carefully around my grief, but you simply charge forward and say the very things everyone else is too cautious to voice. I have nothing to lose, Isabel pointed out. I am either a deluded romantic or a mercenary fortune hunter. Either way, my reputation in your eyes is already compromised. So yes, I speak freely. Jonathan's lips twitched. You are quite extraordinary, Lady Isabel. I am not certain whether that is a compliment or an observation of fact, but there it is nonetheless. I will accept it as both, Isabel said. Now, shall we continue this honest conversation? Continue, Jonathan said. Though I warn you, Lady Isabel, you may not find all my honest answers to your liking. They spent the next 2 hours in conversation. Jonathan was more intelligent than she had anticipated, his mind shaped by years of parliamentary service. He had a dry wit that emerged occasionally. Beneath everything, he carried a bone-deep loneliness. By the time Mrs. Hathaway interrupted to announce luncheon, Isabel felt they had made genuine progress towards mutual understanding. The afternoon brought an unexpected development. Jonathan appeared in the morning room and informed her he would be riding over the northern portion of his estate to inspect spring planting, and wondered if she might care to accompany him. Within the hour, the 3 of them were mounted and setting out. Isabel had been in the saddle since childhood. They rode in companionable silence. You ride well, Jonathan observed. Many London ladies treat horses as mere conveyances. I am a Devon lady with a father who believed every gentleman's daughter should be at ease in the saddle. A practical man, your father. How does he feel about your current adventure? He believes I am wasting my youth on a fantasy. He has told me I should accept Mr. Whitley, who is a respectable gentleman. Mr. Whitley being proposal number 18. Proposal number 17, actually. Mr. Whitley has proposed 3 times. I do not love him, and I never shall. He deserves better than a wife who settles for him. Jonathan reined in his horse near a stream and moved to help Isabel down. His hands at her waist were steady and impersonal. You could have accepted him and been comfortable, Jonathan said quietly. Instead, you traveled across 2 counties to honor a promise to a man who has given you no encouragement whatsoever. That is either remarkable faith or remarkable foolishness. Perhaps both, Isabel allowed. But I would rather be a remarkable fool than a comfortable coward. At least I can look at myself in the mirror and know I tried, even if I fail. Jonathan came to stand beside her. What will you do if you return to Devon without achieving what you came here to accomplish? "I will accept Mr. Whitley's next proposal," Isabel replied honestly. "I owe it to my family to stop clinging to fantasies and accept reality." "That seems rather bleak." "It is practical. I am 24, firmly on the shelf. If I cannot have what I want, I will settle for what is possible." Jonathan was silent for a long moment. "You should not have to settle, Lady Isabel. You deserve more than resignation." "As do you," Isabel replied, turning to look at him directly. "You deserve more than self-imposed isolation based on guilt. Perhaps we are meant to remind each other that life should be lived rather than merely endured." He met her gaze, and Isabel saw a flicker of genuine interest. "You are relentless," he said softly. "I shall take that as a compliment." That evening, for the first time, Jonathan joined them for dinner in the formal dining room. His presence transformed the experience from melancholy to merely quiet. It was progress, small, incremental, uncertain progress, but progress nonetheless. She had 4 days remaining. The third day of Isabel's residence at Tremont Hall dawned with persistent English drizzle. Isabel made her way downstairs to discover that Jonathan had retreated to the library. Mrs. Hathaway suggested that Lady Isabel might find the music room of interest. Isabel entered to find a space that was both beautiful and unutterably sad. A fine layer of dust on the magnificent pianoforte suggested it had not been played in years. No one has touched it in 9 years. Isabel turned to find Jonathan standing in the doorway. It was Lady Amelia's pianoforte. "A wedding gift from her father," Jonathan confirmed. "She played beautifully. This room was her sanctuary." "And you have left it untouched ever since," Isabel observed gently. "I could not bear to hear it played by anyone else. It seemed a desecration." Isabel turned back to the pianoforte. "May I try? I warn you, I am not accomplished." "But surely even inadequate music is preferable to this silence." Finally he nodded slowly. "Play if you wish, though I cannot promise to stay and listen." Isabel seated herself. Her fingers found the keys. She played for perhaps 10 minutes, and when she finally lifted her hands, she found Jonathan sitting in a chair near the window, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Isabel rose, kneeling beside his chair, her hand resting lightly on the arm. "I should not have played. I did not mean to cause you pain." Jonathan shook his head, one hand coming up to cover his eyes. "The pain was already there, Lady Isabel. You simply reminded me that it exists beneath the numbness I have cultivated so carefully." "I loved her," he said quietly. "She was light and music and laughter. I do not know how to be that man again. I am not certain I want to be. I am asking you to discover who you can become now, after grief, after loss. That man does not have to be defined entirely by absence and regret." Jonathan reached out, almost unconsciously, and touched her cheek. "You are so young. How did you become so wise?" "I am not wise," Isabel corrected. "I am merely stubborn enough to believe that life should be more than survival, that love once lost does not preclude love found again." He withdrew his hand slowly. "Stay with me," he said quietly. "Just for today. Let me show you who I am now, and then you can decide whether that is someone worth the journey you have made." "I will stay," Isabel promised. "Whatever you show me will be enough, because it will be real." He stood, extending his hand to help her rise. They remained thus for a moment, hands clasped. "Come," Jonathan said finally. "Let me show you the library. If you are to know who I am now, you should see where I spend most of my time." The library revealed itself to be Jonathan's true sanctuary. "I retreat here when the house becomes too empty," Jonathan admitted. "Books are excellent companions. They demand nothing, judge nothing." "They also cannot love you," Isabel pointed out gently, "cannot challenge you to become more than you are." Jonathan allowed it. He gestured to a small stack of books. Poetry mostly. The Romantics. Their understanding of loss and beauty speaks to something in me. Isabel lifted the top volume. It fell open to a page. She read aloud the lines, "For beauty is a God-given gift, but kindness a choice." "You marked this passage?" "Years ago, when I believed in blessings and choices and the power of kindness to shape one's world." His voice held a bitterness. Before I learned that all the kindness in the world cannot prevent tragedy, but kindness can help us endure those cruelties, can it not? Can help us find reasons to continue when everything argues for surrender. That is perhaps the only meaning available to us. Jonathan turned to the window. You speak as though you have experience of tragedy. Has your life been so difficult, Lady Isabel? Not in the way yours has been, but I have watched my parents struggle with the disappointment I represent. I have felt the small tragedy of dreams deferred. It has taught me something about endurance nonetheless. You should have married one of your 18 suitors and been happy. I refuse to regret the choices I have made, Lord Tremont, even if they have brought me to this peculiar moment, sitting in your library. He turned to face her. You have a strength that most people lack that is, in fact, quite remarkable. As is your capacity to feel grief so deeply, Isabel replied. You have remained faithful to Lady Amelia's memory for 9 years. That speaks to a capacity for love that is equally remarkable. Misdirected how? Because love should inspire us to live, not to entomb ourselves alongside those we have lost. Would she wish to see you buried alive in this house? Jonathan was silent for a long moment. Amelia told me, the night before I left for London, that she was afraid. I laughed at her fears, assured her that all would be well. How am I meant to forgive myself for that, Lady Isabel? Isabel rose and crossed to him. She took his hands in hers. You forgive yourself by recognizing that you are human, that humans cannot see the future. You forgive yourself by living the life she would have wanted for you. And you forgive yourself by allowing someone else to remind you that you deserve forgiveness. Jonathan looked down at their joined hands. And if I cannot, if the guilt is too deep, then I will continue to remind you, Isabel said steadily, for as long as you will allow me to remain. That is the promise I am keeping, the promise to be patient, to be persistent, and to refuse to accept your insistence that you are beyond redemption. He pulled his hands free to regain some measure of control. I do not know if I can be what you want me to be. I do not want you to be anything other than yourself. That is enough. The afternoon dissolved into evening. They spent it in the library, sometimes speaking, sometimes simply sitting in companionable silence. Mrs. Fletcher appeared briefly, but withdrew quickly. Dinner that evening flowed more easily. Isabel reflected that she was no longer certain 1 week would be sufficient, but she had 3 days remaining. The 4th day brought improved weather. Isabel descended to breakfast to find Jonathan already present. Good morning, Lady Isabel, he greeted her. I thought if you are amenable, we might visit the village this morning. It occurs to me that you have seen nothing of the surrounding area beyond Tremont Hall itself. Isabel accepted. Mrs. Fletcher accompanied them. The village of Lower Tremont nestled in a valley perhaps 2 miles from the hall. Jonathan drove them in an open carriage. Their first stop was the cottage of Mrs. Bellamy, a widow. The whole village is talking of nothing else, my lord, Mrs. Bellamy observed. A lady arriving at Tremont Hall unannounced and remaining for days. It is the most exciting thing to happen here in years. Mrs. Bellamy, Jonathan said with a mixture of exasperation and fondness, you do not change. Someone must speak plainly to you, since everyone else tiptoes around as though you were made of glass. Mrs. Bellamy turned her attention to Isabel. Tell me, child, what do you make of our Earl? I believe, Mrs. Bellamy, that Lord Tremont is capable of change if he chooses to be. Whether he will choose it remains to be seen. The visit continued frankly. They visited 2 more cottages. Jonathan inquired after sick children and discussed crop rotation. As they drove back, Jonathan glanced at Isabel. You handled Mrs. Bellamy's interrogation well. She can be formidable when she chooses. She reminds me of my grandmother, Isabel replied warmly. She liked you as well. The fact that she did not send you away with a lecture about fortune hunters suggests she sees something genuine in your presence here. And do you? Jonathan was silent for a long moment. I see a woman who has traveled a great distance based on a promise she made as a child. I see intelligence, determination, and a capacity for patience that I would not have predicted. Whether that constitutes what you hoped I would see, I cannot say. It is more than enough. You are seeing me rather than simply wishing me gone. That is considerable progress. 4 days, Jonathan repeated. You have 3 days remaining of our agreement. Have you given thought to what happens when those 3 days expire? I propose we simply continue as we have been, and when the week concludes, we will know what comes next. Jonathan helped her down from the carriage. You are remarkable, Lady Isabel. I find myself uncertain whether that is a blessing or a complication, but remarkable nonetheless. The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor, Lord Rupert Harlow, Jonathan's cousin and heir. Lord Rupert proved to be perhaps 35, handsome in a way that was just slightly too polished. "Cousin Jonathan," Rupert said as he accepted a glass of brandy, "I heard through village gossip that you were entertaining a lady visitor. Suddenly entertaining a lady who arrives unannounced suggests either a remarkable change of heart or, forgive me, susceptibility to manipulation by a clever fortune hunter." Isabel felt the blood drain from her face as fury rose. Before she could formulate a response, Jonathan was on his feet, his expression thunderous. "You will apologize to Lady Isabel immediately," he said with dangerous quiet, "or you will leave my house and not return." "I meant no offense," Rupert assured him smoothly. "I am simply concerned for your welfare. 9 years of grief have made you vulnerable." "Lord Tremont is not being taken advantage of," Isabel said, finding her voice. "I came here for personal reasons. They concern a promise made 14 years ago by a child who believed in honor and keeping one's word," Isabel replied, lifting her chin. "I will not dignify your accusations with further explanation." Jonathan moved to stand beside Isabel. "You have said quite enough, cousin. Lady Isabel is my guest, and I will not have her insulted in my house. If you cannot speak with respect, you are no longer welcome here." Rupert rose. "Very well, Jonathan. I apologize if my concern was expressed too bluntly. I hope you will act with appropriate caution." He departed. Isabel allowed herself to sink into the nearest chair. "I am sorry you were subjected to that," Jonathan said quietly. "Rupert has always been convinced he will inherit. He believes I am a fortune hunter," Isabel said flatly. "I can see why he might think that." Jonathan sat across from her. "I do not believe you are a fortune hunter, Lady Isabel. A fortune hunter would have flattered rather than confronted, would have sought to make herself indispensable through manipulation rather than honesty." "I can be certain," Jonathan replied steadily, "because I have watched you these past 4 days. If you are acting a part, Lady Isabel, you are the finest actress in England." "Thank you, I needed to hear that. Lord Rupert's accusations struck deeper than they should have, because there is a part of me that wonders if I have been selfish in coming here." "Have you?" "Yes," Isabel admitted finally. "I came here because I wanted to fulfill a childhood promise, but I also came because I genuinely believed you needed someone to challenge your grief. Perhaps most human actions contain elements of both selfishness and genuine care." Jonathan's expression softened. "That is perhaps the most honest answer I have ever heard to a difficult question. You acknowledge complexity without apology. That is rare, Lady Isabel." "I have had 4 days to learn from your example." Jonathan rose and extended his hand. "Come, I want to show you something." Isabel took his hand. He led her to a doorway at the far end of the first floor. "This is the north wing, the rooms Lady Amelia used and the nursery we prepared for our daughter. I had them locked after their deaths, but I think it is time someone reminded me that they were rooms for living." He opened the door. Isabel followed into a suite that was both heartbreaking and beautiful. The rooms remained frozen in time, the empty cradle and toys that had never been played with. She stopped before a portrait of Lady Amelia. Amelia had been beautiful, but what struck Isabel most forcefully was how young she looked, barely older than Isabel herself. "She was 4 and 20 when she died," Jonathan said from behind her. "Your age, exactly. I was 9 and 20. Instead, we had 9 months of marriage." "She was extraordinary," Jonathan corrected. "She made me better than I was, and I failed her when she needed me most." "You loved her. That is not failure. Loving someone deeply and losing them is tragic, but the love itself is never a failure." Jonathan looked at her. He reached for her, pulling her into an embrace that was desperate rather than romantic. Isabel held him as he wept. She simply remained present, while he finally allowed himself to feel the full weight of what he had lost. Finally, he pulled back. "I apologize. That was hardly appropriate behavior." "It was entirely appropriate. You have carried that grief alone for 9 years. Jonathan caught her hand, holding it against his cheek. "You are a woman of remarkable fortitude, Lady Isabel. You break through defenses I did not realize I still possessed. You make me feel things I swore I would never feel again." "Is that so terrible?" "I do not know. But I know that 3 days ago I was certain I wanted you gone from my house, and now I am not certain of anything except that losing you at the end of this week will be considerably more difficult than I anticipated." "Then perhaps," she said quietly, "we should not think about the end of the week. Perhaps we should simply focus on the time we have remaining and see where it leads us." Jonathan nodded slowly. 3 days. We have 3 days to determine if what I feel is genuine or simply the result of loneliness and your persistent refusal to allow me to remain in comfortable isolation. 3 days, Isabel agreed, and whatever we discover in those 3 days will be truth. They left the North Wing together. The evening brought dinner and conversation that was easier than any they had yet shared. Jonathan spoke of his plans for the estate. Mrs. Fletcher, observing their interaction with shrewd eyes, smiled. Isabel had 3 days remaining. She would make it enough. The 5th day dawned clear and bright. Isabel dressed with particular care. When she descended to breakfast, she found Jonathan waiting. "Good morning, Lady Isabel. I thought you might enjoy seeing Tremont Hall from horseback. On a day such as this, it would be a shame to remain indoors." Isabel accepted. Within the hour, they were mounted and riding away. Jonathan guided them to a clearing near the river, where the banks were thick with primroses. "This was Amelia's favorite spot on the estate," Jonathan said quietly. "I have not visited since she died." Isabel moved to the bench. "It is beautiful. I have been thinking about what you said regarding grief and guilt, about honoring memory through living. Amelia would have hated seeing me locked away. She would have wanted me to find happiness again." "And can you? Find happiness again, I mean?" Jonathan turned to look at her. "I do not know, but I know that since you arrived 5 days ago, I have felt things. Anger, certainly, but also curiosity, interest. You have disrupted my comfortable grief, Lady Isabel, and I find I am both grateful and terrified by that disruption." "Terrified of what?" "Of hoping again, and terrified that if I allow myself to feel, I will only set myself up for further loss when you inevitably realize I am not worth the journey you have made." Isabel took his hand. "You are worth every mile I traveled, Lord Tremont. You are worth the 18 proposals I refused. You are fundamentally a good man who has been wounded by tragedy. That man is worth finding, worth knowing, worth caring for." Jonathan raised their joined hands to his forehead. "I do not deserve your faith in me. That is not for you to decide. The question is whether you can allow yourself to accept that choice." "2 more days," he said quietly. "We have 2 more days of your week, Lady Isabel. Let us use them well, and then we will decide what comes next." The afternoon brought an unexpected development. Mrs. Hathaway informed Isabel that the Dowager Countess had arrived. The Dowager Countess proved to be a handsome woman of perhaps 60 years, with silver hair and eyes that held the same grey shade as her son's, but considerably more warmth. "My son has sent word of your presence here. I confess curiosity compelled me to call. I am certain my presence must seem highly irregular. The truth is rather difficult to explain." "Try," the Dowager invited. Isabel recounted the story, the childhood visit, the promise, the 14 years of waiting. "That is either the most romantic story I have heard in 50 years, the Dowager said finally, or the most elaborate scheme ever devised by a fortune hunter. I refused 18 proposals from men who could have provided excellent settlements. I came here because I made a promise, and because I genuinely believed your son needed someone to challenge his grief." "And have you?" "I have tried. I have seen him weep, seen him laugh, seen him actually feel emotions." The Dowager nodded slowly. "I have watched my son slowly die over the past 9 years. If you have managed to reach him where I failed, then you have accomplished something valuable." Jonathan appeared. "Mama, I should have known you would appear the moment gossip reached you." I am prepared to offer cautious support for whatever peculiar arrangement you two have concocted. She seems a sensible girl with unusual convictions and remarkable courage. You could do considerably worse. 2 days, Isabel said quietly to Jonathan after the dowager left. How do you propose we use those days? Jonathan finally looked at her. I propose we spend tomorrow honestly exploring whether what I feel is genuine or simply the result of loneliness and your remarkable persistence. And I propose that by the end of your week, we will both know what comes next. The 6th day arrived with the quiet certainty of an ending approaching. I have given considerable thought to how we might best use today. I would like to show you something I have not shared with anyone since Amelia's death. After breakfast, Jonathan led them to a small stone mausoleum. Amelia and our daughter are buried here. I have never brought anyone else with me. This has been my private grief. Why bring me now? Jonathan turned to face her. Because if we are to have any future together, you must understand that Amelia will always be part of my past. I cannot offer you a heart that has never loved before. I can only offer you what remains, a heart that has learned the cost of love and is terrified of risking that pain again but is willing to try. What I hoped for was that you might be willing to honor her memory by living again. And if I try and fail, if I discover I am too afraid of loss to risk connection, then at least you will have tried. That is all any of us can do. Jonathan reached out, cupping her face. You are brave and honest, and so determined to save me from myself that I cannot help but be moved by your faith in possibilities. I am trying to remind you that you are capable of saving yourself. All I can offer is presence, persistence, and the promise that if you decide to try living again, you will not have to do it alone. He leaned his forehead against hers. I am afraid, Jonathan admitted, his voice raw. I am afraid of loving again and losing again. I fear my heart has worn out its welcome for joy 9 years past. Then be afraid, Isabel replied. Be afraid, but do it anyway. That is the only courage that matters. Jonathan pulled back slightly. Then slowly, deliberately, he leaned down and kissed her. It was tentative, questioning. When they finally separated, Jonathan rested his forehead against hers. I think I could love you, Lady Isabel. I think perhaps I am already beginning to love you. The question is whether I have the courage to allow that love to develop fully. You have 1 more day to decide. 1 more day, Jonathan agreed. The 7th and final day dawned. Isabel dressed in her finest morning gown. They walked slowly toward the lilac arbor. Do you remember, Jonathan said finally, what you said to me that day? The exact words? I said, when I grow up, I shall marry you. And you laughed. I never imagined you would actually return. I never imagined I would be standing here 14 years later, trying to determine whether those words still hold meaning. And what have you decided? Jonathan turned to face her. I have decided that you are the most remarkable woman I have ever known. I have decided that your persistence has saved me from a living death. I have decided that I am terrified of what you make me feel, but more terrified of losing the possibility you represent. And I am asking you to stay, Jonathan said, his grip tightening. I am asking you, Lady Isabel Drayton, if you will consent to be my wife, to help me learn to live again, to be patient with me when I retreat into grief, and courageous enough to pull me back to life when I forget how. Tears spilled down Isabel's cheeks. Yes, she said, her voice catching. Yes, I will marry you, I will stay. I will help you learn to live again. Jonathan pulled her into his arms. When they finally separated, he withdrew a small velvet box. This was my mother's ring. I had it cleaned and resized yesterday. I know it is irregular. I only care that you are willing to take a chance on a man who is still learning how to hope again. He opened the box to reveal a sapphire surrounded by diamonds. Jonathan slid the ring onto her finger. It is perfect, she said softly. Nothing is perfect, Jonathan corrected gently. But perhaps that is acceptable. Perhaps real is more valuable than perfect. We will have challenges ahead. But I think together we might be strong enough to face those challenges. I know we will be. We came together through persistence and courage and a willingness to believe that even the most improbable promises can be kept. They walked back to the house hand in hand. Mrs. Fletcher greeted the news with tears. Mrs. Hathaway responded with quiet satisfaction. The Dowager Countess arrived within hours, beaming, and immediately began to plan a wedding. 5 years later, a spring morning much like the one when Isabel had first arrived. The house no longer felt like a mausoleum, but like a home. Jonathan stood in the lilac arbor watching his wife approach. Their 3 children trailed behind her. Thomas, 4 years old. The twin girls, Charlotte and Eleanor, were 2 years old. "They have escaped their nurse again," Isabel said with mock severity. "I found them attempting to teach the kitchen cat to swim in the fountain." Jonathan laughed. The cat appears to have survived the experience relatively intact. But they are happy, and that is what matters most. Jonathan pulled his wife close. "Do you ever regret it? Traveling to Somerset to honor a promise made by a 10-year-old child?" "Never," Isabel replied firmly. "I kept my promise, and in doing so, I found something more valuable than I could have imagined. A husband who loves me deeply, children who will grow up knowing that love is worth any risk, and a home where grief has given way to joy." They stood together in the arbor. Jonathan had learned to carry his loss as memory, rather than as a weight. The mausoleum was still visited regularly, but now Jonathan often brought his children with him. Lord Rupert had eventually apologized. The Dowager Countess had become Isabel's closest confidant, frequently declaring that she had known from the first moment that Lady Isabel was exactly what Jonathan needed. Isabel herself had discovered that waiting 14 years had not been foolishness, but wisdom. "Thank you," Jonathan said quietly to Isabel, "for keeping your promise, for refusing to give up, for teaching me that it is possible to honor the past while embracing the future." Isabel smiled. "You are welcome, my lord. I gained you after all." They gathered their children and returned to the house as evening approached, a family built on the foundation of a childhood promise kept and a grief overcome. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end of this extraordinary tale. If this story of promise kept and love rediscovered touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who believes in second chances and the power of persistent faith. Your support helps us continue creating stories where hope triumphs over grief and love proves stronger than loss.